So the example that we saw in the spreadsheet is really very similar to what we use in a standard database. And in fact, what a database is really structured data like you saw in the spreadsheet with an API for accessing that data, for adding data, for modifying data, and for retrieving data by searching for it. A database is defined by a schema. A schema is just a fancy word that specifies the structure. A schema contains tables, and a table is just like what we saw as sheets in the spreadsheet example. Each table has a number of fields or columns, where each field or column has a data type. In the spreadsheet, there's kind of an implicit data type, but when you define a schema in a database, you will typically explicitly say what the data type is. A field might be a string, or an integer, or a date. Finally, there is a mechanism to join multiple tables using the concept of a shared unique ID across tables. Databases with the structure that we have just seen are extremely common. Probably the most common kind is what is called a relational database. A relational database uses a fixed schema. That is, at the time you create the database, you define all of the tables, you define all of the fields and data types within each table. And then there is a standard language, a textual language, that is used to add data to the tables, for modifying them, for searching, and so on. And the most common language for this, you may have seen this before, is called SQL, pronounced SQL, and it stands for Structured Query Language. We're not going to worry about what SQL looks like at this point. But I do want to say that there are a number of very common SQL databases that you may have heard of. There are some open source ones, such as MySQL, which is used on many commercial websites. And then there is a smaller version called SQLite, which is often used in smaller software development, even if it's not for a web server, even if you're just trying to use a database in your own program. And of course, there are major commercial database providers, such as Oracle and Microsoft. Microsoft has a desktop database system that you may be familiar with called Access, but its commercial product is called SQL Server. Finally, the hosting services that I mentioned, such as 1&1, almost always include built-in support for MySQL, even at the basic price of $3 a month. So getting access to a fully functional database in a web environment is completely standard practice.